guys, Mr. Halp here, and this is lesson 9B. I'm starting to talk about the preparation process for writing that synthesis essay that you may have to undertake on the AP Lang test. This is actually, starting to put some forethought into it. Last time around, I gave you the big basics about, hey, this is what we should be looking for, this is what the graders are looking for, this is what you should be overall just trying to accomplish with it. Now we're getting in a little bit more of the nuts and bolts and saying, okay, you've got to make one. What should you do to start things off? Okay, so preparing to write the synthesis essay for the AP Lang test. So let's start off here, of course. To help you locate supporting points later on while you're writing, underline a few key words and put a stroke through sources you don't want to use. This isn't a bad idea, okay? Now, obviously, in whatever way you need to or can, don't make any markings on the test that you're not allowed to make on the test, of course. But nonetheless, if you remember back to rhetorical analysis, one of the things I talked about you endlessly was annotate, annotate, annotate. That wasn't just for the rhetorical analysis. The whole concept of annotating is just as important here with the synthesis essay as it was back with the rhetorical analysis essay. So by all means, annotate, annotate, annotate. Put your gray matter and smear it all over the paper. Underline keywords, highlight important quotes, whatever the case may be, because you're going to make your life infinitely easier to do that. Remember, you don't get that much more time set aside for you to do this particular assignment, because really it's just 2 hours for the great big 3 writing assignments. So as a consequence for that, the less work you have to do going back through those 7 sources or so, the better, okay? It's great if you can jot down a quick outline of the points you want to make, the order in which you'll explain them as you develop your argument, and the source you'll use and cite to support each of your points. So just so you have some sense of where you're going and how you're going to get there, okay? And really, if you've done the proper annotation, one would hope that maybe you've already got a few key quotes and pieces of evidence illustrated on the original sources. Now you might just, label them with a letter or label them with a shape, and then you can just sort of make that quick outline of information and say, okay, this is my thesis. My first claim is going to be this, and I'm going to have that evidence, and that evidence, or something along those lines. Just a way so that you know that you know where you're going and how you're going to get there. Because if you're making it up as you go along, you're going to end up forgetting something, misplacing something, having all of the information from one source back to back to back, which isn't a cool look for anyone. So you just want to make sure that you're thinking in advance, okay, these are all these great quotes and pieces of information I found. How could I organize them in a way that best proves my thesis? Which ones go with which claims? Stuff of that sort, okay? Make sure you're anticipating objections to your position. Counter arguments are just as relevant in this context as they were in any of the other contexts. So are there any objections, and are there any passages you could be pulling out of your sources that will help you to dispel those counter arguments that might pop up? So put some forethought into that as you're generating this very modest little outline that you might be creating, okay? Just like we talked about extensively with the sophistication component of the argumentative essay, be prepared for complexities. Recognize and respect them. If there was a one-size-fits-all kind of solution and you had it, then there wouldn't be 7 sources from you to pull from. There'd be one source, it would be treated as gospel truth, and everyone would agree with it. So there aren't any easy solutions. Don't pretend like there are. There are a variety of valid perspectives. Don't pretend like there aren't, okay? If you approach it from that perspective, it's going to have a lot more nuance and complexity that's inevitably going to help you out in that sophistication point as well as you get into this particular essay, okay? Make sure, and this goes along exactly with that topic, you're acknowledging the biases and limitations of the sources you choose to use. Again, none of these sources are going to be perfect, okay? There are going to be limitations to them. It doesn't hurt for you to identify them because it shows that you're reasonable and open-minded, and it also shows that you have approached this from a very objective perspective, and that's good ethos. So if you do witness some limitations to your sources, bring them up, show them to us. That's not a bad thing by any stretch of the imagination, okay? Go ahead and find inspiration by asking questions about your sources. That's not a bad thing, and it's not a bad thing to bring up as well, because you do have to establish why you chose the sources that you chose to some minor degree, perhaps. Remember, that was one of the things that we talked about back up here in the previous day's conversation. You need to know how to judge the best sources to back up your position. So it might be something worth mentioning to tell us, well, why you chose the source or you chose, or what makes them a good source. Build ethos for your source, not just building ethos for yourself. Okay? What kind of source is it? Who is the writer? Where was it published? When was it published? I mean, you get the sense that there are going to be some sources that you can choose that they're almost there, put in there to trick you. Like if you choose this source, then you chose a bad source because they put it in there to make you think that it was a good source, but it's written by someone who doesn't have credibility and who lacks writing ability and who doesn't know how to be argumentative and things of that sort. So you need to choose the best sources, and if you're going to choose the best sources, you need to know what you're looking for. So remember all of those things, all of those tools that we have at our disposal when we're trying to find good sources, okay? You can also find some inspiration by asking questions about the source's claims and evidence. So getting into each of those individual things, and hopefully you're asking these questions as early as the first time you're reading them, not just when you're starting to write your essay, but while you're reading them for the first time. But saying to yourself, well, what is the writer's position on the subject? What is the main argument? Does it harmonize with your perspective on things? Does it present good counter-arguments to your ideas on things? Is it going to help you support your argument in some way, shape, or form? Talking a little bit and asking a little bit about the ethos of those individual sources. What unique expertise or experience does the writer bring to the text? Because remember, you need to be choosing the best sources, and you may even want to be developing ethos for your sources in your argument, okay? What perspective on the topic does the writer convey? Is it someone we can trust? Is it someone who isn't maybe occupying any of those extremes that make them less likely to be a good, reliable source, okay? And of course, the obvious one, what evidence does the writer use to support his or her argument, okay? Is it evidence that you will value from? Even if it is contradictory, is there some value for it in your particular essay or not, okay? You should also remember to be asking those questions about the source's limitations, okay? The things that they don't do well, okay? What biases does the writer reveal in the argument and its line of reasoning? Do they seem to espouse one side to the neglect of the other? Do they not seem open-minded and objective in how they're approaching this particular situation? That's going to make for a lesser source in the grand scheme of things, okay? What perspectives does the writer fail to consider? Do they completely overlook one side? Maybe because they're hoping you don't notice, or because they just consider it to be so beneath them that it's not worthy of their attention, but it really is worthy of their attention. Okay, so you want to make sure that those sources that you're choosing on that synthesis document are going to have the best sources, have the least amount of bias or undue bias, and that have a perspective that is far-reaching, that we would say is representative, that doesn't exclude anything notable, okay? What potential objections might a reader have to the writer's argument? So, sure, you read these 7 sources, but would I, as the reader, also read them and choose the same sources? Would I weight them as equally as you would? Or would I dislike some that you liked or like some that you disliked? So, anticipate some objections that your reader might have about the argument that the authors are making, okay? And then, of course, obviously, you know it was going to come sooner or later, you need to develop a thesis, specifically a thesis statement that is arguable and not a statement of fact. We've talked about that ad nauseum. I don't think there's anything new to share on that front, but I'm going to do it anyway. But so, just because it's so gosh darn important, yes, it should be arguable. Again, not everyone is going to agree with it. Not everyone is going to believe it. And that means that it also can't be a statement of fact, in which case, why even defend it in the first place? It's a fact. We all agree with it. There's nothing to prove. So, yeah, again, you all know that stuff by this point in time. I'm beating a dead horse. You might want to think about using some of those keywords from the prompt directly in your thesis to make it very abundantly clear that you're addressing that thesis. That way we can't be unsure or unclear if you are or are not. So by all means, use some keywords. Don't restate the thesis. Don't rephrase the thesis necessarily. But if you want to use a word or synonyms for words from that prompt in your thesis, there's certainly nothing wrong with that. So by all means, go ahead and do that. And of course, when in doubt, opt for a thesis you feel confident supporting with evidence and explanation. So if you're really drawing a lot of blanks, not knowing what direction you want to take it, not knowing what you want to do, and so on and so forth, just make sure you're asking yourself, okay, I have no idea where to go with this. What can I prove? What do I have evidence to prove? Which are the best sources as far as I'm concerned? And what do they all agree upon that I can have as a solid thesis argument? Okay. Now, granted, that's not the best situation to be in. You don't want to find yourself in that situation. But again, that's why it says when in doubt. If you've got nothing else to play with at your disposal, do it that way. Okay, so that's preparing to write your synthesis argument essay. As always, if you have any questions or concerns, by all means, bring them to class. We're going to keep on touching on some further things, getting into the body of this particular essay the next time we have a lesson. But in the meantime, know that I'll miss you all, and I will see you shortly, guys.